We move through life heavily invested in the assumption that our actions are entirely our own. We prefer to believe that our choices are spontaneous, our daily reactions justified, and our individual paths entirely unique. But if we possess the discipline to pause, if we step back and objectively observe the rhythm of our daily existence, a vastly different reality often emerges. We are creatures of profound, deeply ingrained habit. We wake at the same times, follow the exact same routines, and, most critically, we react in the exact same ways to the exact same external pressures. When a specific colleague challenges us, we raise our voices in defense. When someone ignores us, we withdraw into silence. When a familiar stressor is applied, we yield or push back in a manner that anyone who has known us for more than a few months could easily anticipate. This is the comfort of predictability. It is a quiet, unassuming rhythm that asks very little of our cognitive reserves. It feels like safety. It feels like stability. But this psychological safety carries a massive, often invisible cost. When you become entirely predictable, you begin to systematically fade into the background of your own life and the lives of those around you. Consider the environment you sit in right now. The human mind is biologically designed to filter out the constant, the unchanging, and the thoroughly expected. We do not notice the hum of a refrigerator until the motor finally stops. We do not notice the ticking of a hallway clock until the house falls perfectly silent. The human brain conserves vital energy by actively ignoring what it already fully understands. This exact same psychological mechanism applies directly to human interaction and social dynamics. When people know exactly how you will respond, exactly what you will say, and exactly where your emotional boundaries lie, their minds no longer need to actively process your presence. You become a thoroughly known quantity. And in the complex, ever-shifting dynamic of human relationships, becoming a known quantity often equates to becoming entirely invisible. This is not a matter of placing blame, nor is it a sign of weakness. It is a natural human tendency to seek equilibrium and reduce friction. We build these predictable behavioral patterns because they drastically reduce the cognitive load required to navigate a complex world. But when your ultimate goal is to make a substantial impact, to be clearly heard, to build deep and lasting respect, or simply to take firm control of your own personal narrative, this predictability becomes a heavy anchor. People begin to stop asking for your input because they are confident they already know exactly what you will say. They may stop considering your boundaries because they believe they know exactly how far they can push before you react, and precisely what that reaction will look like when it arrives. Your influence diminishes, not because you lack inherent value, but because your value has been neatly categorized, filed away in the minds of others, and subsequently taken for granted. You have likely felt this friction in your daily interactions. It manifests as a lingering sense of being overlooked, a quiet, persistent frustration that your words do not carry the gravity they rightfully should. This is the inevitable penalty of being entirely readable. When there is no mystery, there is no psychological curiosity, and where there is no curiosity, human attention rapidly withers. Many people, upon realizing they have become invisible to their peers or partners, make a critical and costly miscalculation. They assume the antidote to being ignored is to become loud. They seek immediate attention through exaggerated actions, through manufactured controversy, through complaining, or simply through volume. They attempt to forcefully compel the world to look at them, but this frantic energy is just another transparent form of predictability. The person who always shouts to be heard is just as easy to anticipate as the person who always remains silent. Attention-seeking is a desperate reaction, and desperation is perhaps the easiest human emotion to read and dismiss. To become truly impossible to ignore, you must execute a pivot away from the loud, the frantic, and the desperate. True, undeniable presence is not about taking up more physical or auditory space. It is about fundamentally changing the quality and the density of the space you already occupy. It is rooted in profound emotional control. It is anchored in strategic clarity. It is the quiet, heavy power that naturally emanates from an individual who has completely mastered their own internal responses. When you systematically stop reacting on cue, the dynamic immediately and permanently shifts. Imagine a high-pressure scenario where you are expected to be angry, where the established script dictates that you lose your temper and defend yourself. Now, imagine responding to that exact same pressure with a calm, measured, and unbreakable silence. The sudden interruption of that expected pattern demands immediate attention. It forces the other person to wake up from their own autopilot, to reassess the situation, and to actively engage with the present moment. They can no longer rely on their outdated mental model of who you are. They are forced to pay attention. This internal shift requires a rigorous and uncompromising level of self-awareness. It means stepping back and observing your own emotional triggers as if you were studying a complex, external system. It means taking full responsibility for the vital space that exists between an external stimulus and your internal response. In that brief space lies your freedom, and in that freedom lies your ultimate gravity. When you master that space, you stop being a reflexive mechanism and start being a deliberate, intentional force. You learn to communicate effectively and powerfully, not by dominating or overpowering those around you, but by possessing such deep internal clarity that your words carry undeniable, independent weight. This journey is never about manipulation. It is never about playing psychological games, fostering a sense of paranoia, or treating human interaction as a battlefield. It is simply about integrity. It is about deciding, with finality, that you will no longer be a passive passenger to your own emotional reflexes. As we navigate through the sections ahead, we will meticulously explore the architecture of this personal transformation. We will dismantle the quiet habits of predictability that keep you securely anchored to the background of your environment. We will look deeply into the psychology of human attention, seeking to understand, ethically and responsibly, why we are naturally drawn to certain individuals and why we rapidly tune others out. We will systematically replace the frantic, exhausting energy of needing to be seen with the calm, grounded, and sustainable power of simply being undeniable. This journey is fundamentally about personal accountability. It is about forging discipline without arrogance and cultivating strength without resorting to hostility. It is about developing a mind so stable and a physical presence so deliberate that you naturally and effortlessly command respect in any room you enter. You will come to learn that becoming impossible to ignore often begins with what you choose not to do. It begins with the words you consciously choose to hold back, the immediate reactions you choose to internalize and process, and the unnecessary emotional displays you choose to eliminate from your repertoire. You will learn the immense tactical value of strategic silence, the deep impact of calculated, unhurried motion, and the profound influence of a person who is entirely comfortable resting in the unknown. This process requires patience. It requires a willingness to observe your own flaws without destructive judgment, and to correct your daily course with a steady, unemotional resolve. The path away from predictability is not about wearing a mask or becoming someone else. It is about stripping away the predictable layers of conditioning to become a far more focused, intentional, and potent version of yourself. Breaking your own predictability is, at its core, an act of profound self-respect. When you allow yourself to operate on an endless loop of autopilot, you quietly surrender your agency to your past conditioning. You react today based entirely on how you learned to survive yesterday, but true growth requires a deliberate disruption of that comfortable cycle. It demands that you sit down and ask yourself whether your current responses are actually serving your highest potential, or if they are simply the path of least cognitive resistance. When you begin to consciously and carefully select your behaviors, you introduce a powerful, magnetic variance into your life. You become dynamic. A dynamic individual is naturally compelling because they represent continuous potential. They are not a closed book that has already been read. They are an unfolding, evolving narrative. People are organically drawn to this because it challenges them to remain alert, present, and engaged. We will approach this methodology not as a collection of tactics to outmaneuver others, but as a lifelong philosophy for mastering yourself. The desire to strictly control how others perceive you is a fragile, exhausting foundation that will eventually crack under pressure. The infinitely stronger foundation is to control how you operate within your own mind, knowing with quiet certainty that respect, attention, and influence are simply the natural byproducts of a disciplined life. We are moving away from the endless, hollow pursuit of external validation and moving steadily toward the bedrock of internal certainty. As we proceed, let go of the false idea that you need to fundamentally alter your core personality or adopt a persona of aggression. You are merely removing the predictable, repetitive noise that obscures your genuine strength. You are clearing the static to reveal the clear, undeniable signal underneath. It is time to rewrite the invisible script that has dictated your interactions for far too long. It is time to step out of the comfortable, restrictive categorizations that others have confidently placed you in and that you have comfortably accepted for yourself. The world inherently respects what it cannot easily dismiss, and it is entirely impossible to dismiss a mind that is continually evolving, observing, and acting with deliberate intent. Prepare to fundamentally shift your perspective. Prepare to take absolute ownership of your presence, your reactions, and your future. The transformation to becoming impossible to ignore begins not with a shout, not with a demand for attention, but with a deliberate, quiet, and unbreakable decision to change the pattern. To begin dismantling your own predictability, we must first examine the architecture of how these patterns are constructed in the first place. Predictability is rarely a conscious choice. Rather, it is the slow accumulation of emotional reflexes built over a lifetime of unexamined interactions. We move through our days accumulating psychological clutter. We form defensive habits, reflexive apologies, automatic agreements, and rapid judgments. We react to an overflowing inbox with a heavy side. We respond to a passive-aggressive comment with an immediate, equally passive-aggressive defense. We meet unexpected delays with visible, performative frustration. Over time, these individual reactions merge to form a rigid, highly recognizable emotional blueprint. When you carry this much psychological clutter, you leave absolutely no room for mystery, no space for pause, and no capacity for an intentional response. You become a thoroughly mapped territory. People around you, whether in a professional setting or a personal dynamic, learn this map quickly. They do not do this out of malice or a desire to control you. They do it because the human brain is an efficient machine that thrives on recognizing patterns. When your emotional blueprint is loudly broadcasted, others simply file you away in the category of the known and expected. The antidote to this sprawling, predictable behavior is a profound psychological minimalism. Think of the spaces that evoke the deepest sense of calm and the highest degree of respect. They are not crowded, chaotic environments filled with unnecessary noise. They are clean, deliberate spaces where every single element serves a specific purpose. Your internal landscape must adopt this exact same principle. You must begin to cultivate an emotional state where there is significantly less psychological stuff, which inherently leads to a far greater sense of internal peace. When you strip away the immediate need to explain yourself, the urge to react to every minor slight, and the compulsion to fill every silence with words, you create a profound void. This void is incredibly powerful. It forces those interacting with you to stop relying on their pre-existing maps and start paying active, highly focused attention to the present moment. By offering less noise, you command vastly more focus. The individual who masters this internal minimalism does not need to raise their voice or demand respect, because their quiet, deliberate nature becomes the most gravitationally dense object in the room. Consider the deeply ingrained habit of over-explaining. It is one of the most common and most damaging forms of predictable behavior. When a boundary is crossed or a mistake is made, the immediate, reflexive urge for many is to launch into a detailed, exhaustive justification. We want to be understood, we want to soften the blow, and we want to manage the other person's perception of us. But every unnecessary word you add to a justification dilutes your core message. It signals a subtle insecurity, a desperate desire for external validation. When people know that you will reliably over-explain yourself the moment you feel challenged, they hold the power in the dynamic. They know they can simply sit back, apply a small amount of pressure, and watch you unravel in a highly predictable stream of words. By contrast, the individual who delivers a firm, concise statement and then comfortably allows the silence to stretch outward is almost impossible to ignore. Their brevity creates a vacuum. It suggests a deep well of internal certainty that does not require external permission to exist. This shift toward concise, deliberate communication fundamentally disrupts the expectations of those around you. When a colleague or a partner expects a lengthy, defensive monologue and instead receives a calm, measured, three-word response, their cognitive processing is abruptly halted. The script they were mentally preparing to read from is suddenly rendered useless. In that specific moment, they cannot predict what you will do next, which naturally increases the likelihood that they will proceed with a much higher degree of caution and respect. This is not an act of hostility. It is an act of establishing profound, unbreakable boundaries. You are simply refusing to provide the emotional fuel that keeps their predictable patterns running. You are returning the responsibility of the interaction back to them, calmly indicating that if they wish to engage, they must do so in the present reality, not in the comfortable anticipated past. This requires discipline. It requires the emotional regulation to withstand the discomfort of an unresolved silence, without rushing in to fix it. We often confuse being authentic with being completely, transparently readable. Society frequently champions the idea of being an open book, suggesting that every passing emotion and every fleeting thought should be immediately visible to the world. But an open book is, by definition, something that can be completely consumed and then set aside. True authenticity does not require you to broadcast every fluctuation of your nervous system. You can be deeply genuine, deeply honest, and fiercely principled, while still maintaining absolute sovereignty over your emotional expressions. Keeping your emotional cards close to your chest is not deceptive. It is a vital form of self-preservation and strategic clarity. When you do not display anger the moment you are provoked, you preserve the energy needed to formulate a truly effective solution. When you do not display immediate joy the moment an offer is presented, you maintain the necessary leverage to negotiate better terms. Emotional containment is the hallmark of a mature, seasoned mind that understands the profound difference between feeling an emotion and becoming entirely possessed by it. To cultivate this containment, you must develop a profound relationship with the concept of the pause. The pause is the microsecond that exists between an external event and your internal reaction. For the highly predictable individual, this space simply does not exist. The stimulus and the response are fused together in an unbreakable, reflexive chain. For the individual who is impossible to ignore, this pause is everything. It is a vast, expansive territory where logic, strategy, and self-awareness are allowed to intervene. When you are criticized, the pause allows you to feel the sting of the insult, acknowledge the rising heat in your chest, and then consciously decide whether a reaction is even warranted. Most of the time, it is not. Most provocations are simply tests of your structural integrity. When you utilize the pause to absorb the impact without visibly reacting, you demonstrate a level of emotional density that is deeply intimidating to those who lack it. You show that your internal environment is securely anchored, entirely independent of the chaotic weather patterns generated by other people. Let us look closely at how this practically reshapes your environment. In any social or professional hierarchy, people continuously test each other to establish where the boundaries lie. They offer minor slights, they interrupt, they subtly challenge your authority, all to gauge how much resistance they will meet. If your response is predictable, if you consistently yield, or if you consistently flare up in anger, you effectively tell them exactly how to handle you in the future. You hand them the instruction manual to your psychological state. However, when you employ the pause, when you absorb the test with a neutral, unreadable expression, you withhold that critical data. They send out a sonar ping, and they receive absolutely nothing in return. This lack of feedback creates a subtle, powerful dissonance in their minds. They cannot categorize you. They cannot determine where they stand in relation to you. This ambiguity is incredibly potent. It forces them to reconsider their approach, to elevate their level of interaction, and to treat you with a significantly higher degree of careful consideration. This methodology demands that you stop participating in the endless, exhausting game of emotional ping-pong. Many interactions devolve into a predictable rhythm of escalation. One person raises their voice, the other matches it. One person becomes passive-aggressive, the other responds with a subtle jab. This cycle only ends when one participant becomes too exhausted to continue, or when the relationship fundamentally fractures. To become impossible to ignore, you must simply drop your paddle. When a conversation begins to spiral into a familiar destructive pattern, you withdraw your emotional investment. You lower your volume, you slow down your physical movements. You speak with a calm, flat cadence that naturally absorbs and neutralizes the frantic energy of the other person. By radically altering your pacing, you force the entire dynamic to reset. You become the anchor point of the interaction. People are biologically drawn to the calmest person in the room during a moment of stress, because that individual represents safety and control. By mastering your own pacing, you naturally assume that position of quiet, unquestionable leadership. The disciplined, unpredictable mind is a monolith. It observes everything, yet remains completely unbroken. To fully comprehend why dismantling your own predictability fundamentally alters how others perceive you, we must first examine the hidden mechanics of human attention. The human mind is, at its core, a relentless engine designed for absolute efficiency. It continuously scans its environment, rapidly categorizes all incoming data, and quickly dismisses anything that appears resolved or safe. When a situation, or a person, is completely understood, the brain actively lowers its processing power to conserve vital mental energy. This is an evolutionary survival mechanism, not a personal insult or a conscious choice. However, in any social or professional dynamic, when you operate with absolute transparency and complete predictability, you inadvertently signal to the minds of others that they no longer need to invest active energy in understanding you. You become a thoroughly settled equation. The mystery is neatly solved, the narrative is entirely closed, and their attention naturally drifts. This phenomenon is deeply rooted in what behavioral psychology often describes as the information gap. Human beings are organically drawn to the missing pieces of any puzzle. When a distinct gap exists between what we currently know and what we desperately want to know, it creates a subtle, unignorable psychological tension. We feel a natural, hardwired drive to resolve that specific tension by paying significantly closer attention. The highly predictable individual provides absolutely no gap. They offer all their information up front, leaving zero room for curiosity to take root and grow. Conversely, the individual who practices disciplined emotional containment and deliberate restraint naturally generates this exact tension. By not over-explaining, by not reacting immediately to pressure, and by keeping their internal processing securely private, they create a quiet, compelling void that others feel naturally compelled to analyze and attempt to fully understand. Consider how this quiet power plays out in the complex arena of daily workplace dynamics and long-term career growth. Your professional value is rarely measured solely by your technical output. It is heavily influenced by how your overall presence is perceived over time. When an individual reacts to every minor daily crisis with the exact same predictable stress, or automatically agrees to every unreasonable demand with the same predictable compliance, their career trajectory almost always plateaus. They become a highly functional but entirely replaceable component of the larger machinery. Their daily actions do not compound into lasting influence because they lack the necessary friction required to generate deep respect. To build true professional gravity, you must begin to curate a fierce reputation for absolute mental efficiency. You must become the rare person whose reactions cannot be easily plotted on a predictable graph by your peers. This specific type of mental efficiency is a profoundly compounding asset over the course of a lifetime. Every single time you consciously choose to break a predictable cycle of immediate reaction, you structurally strengthen your own internal architecture. You actively train your nervous system to tolerate the acute discomfort of unresolved tension without rushing forward to fix it. Over months and years, these micro-decisions continuously compound, forging a completely unshakable emotional baseline. People around you will inevitably begin to notice this fundamental shift. They may not be able to articulate exactly what has changed within you, but they will inherently feel that your words carry significantly more weight and your silent presence demands vastly more space. You are no longer merely reacting to the immediate external pressures of the day. You are navigating the environment with a calm, undeniable, and entirely strategic clarity. Imagine a physical space designed with absolute, uncompromising minimalism, much like traditional Japanese interior architecture. In such an environment, the distinct absence of clutter is not empty. It is deeply peaceful, highly intentional, and profoundly grounding. There are absolutely no unnecessary distractions, no chaotic elements desperately fighting for your limited attention. Every single object present serves a distinct, deliberate purpose, and the empty negative space itself becomes a vital, active part of the overall architecture. Your psychological presence must be systematically cultivated with this exact same level of ruthless, disciplined curation. You must meticulously strip away the chaotic, cluttered behavioral responses that cloud your daily interactions. Stop crowding your important conversations with unnecessary filler words, reflexive apologies, and frantic, desperate justifications. The psychological objective here is incredibly simple, yet profoundly effective. Less stuff, more peace. Allow the quiet, empty spaces in your dialogue to exist naturally, without feeling the overwhelming urge to fill them. In this clean, uncluttered psychological space, silence permanently transforms from a weak weapon of passive aggression into a stark, impenetrable boundary. Highly predictable people almost always fear silence because it forcefully confronts them with their own internal mental noise. They rush to speak because they falsely equate continuous communication with active control over a situation. However, true strategic clarity inherently understands that silence is very often the most articulate and powerful response available. When you are presented with an unreasonable demand, a subtle insult, or an emotionally charged accusation, meeting that frantic energy with a calm, unblinking silence is profoundly effective. It cleanly reflects the chaotic energy directly back onto the originator. It forces them to hear the awkward echo of their own words, often prompting them to rapidly revise their stance or back down entirely without you having to lift a single finger in defense. This approach fundamentally redefines how you engage with daily friction and inevitable conflict. The deeply predictable individual views conflict as a rigid binary state. You either fight back aggressively or you submit completely. Both of these standard responses are entirely expected, highly mapped out, and exceptionally easy for others to manage and manipulate. To become truly impossible to ignore, you must consistently introduce a third, highly disruptive option: calm observation without active emotional participation. When you observe a conflict without allowing it to penetrate your established emotional baseline, you instantly neutralize its power over you. You look at the situation entirely logically, actively assessing the deeper motivations and the hidden pressures at play, without feeling the overwhelming compulsion to defend your fragile ego. This drastically increases the likelihood that you will navigate the complex situation effectively, commanding respect through your sheer, unshakable refusal to participate in the expected chaos. In the nuanced language of psychology and human behavior, a tell is an involuntary physical or verbal reaction that immediately reveals your true internal state. Deeply predictable people are entirely defined by their visible tells: a slight nervous shift in posture, a specific defensive change in vocal tone, a sudden, rapid rush of words. These are the subtle but glaring signals that broadcast your emotional vulnerabilities directly to the observing world. Cultivating true mental efficiency and becoming unignorable requires the systematic identification and complete elimination of these personal tells. You must rigorously practice flattening your external emotional responses. This absolutely does not mean you stop feeling deep emotions. It means you deliberately sever the automatic, reflexive link between what you internally feel and what you externally display. By intentionally contradicting your internal stress with profound external calmness, you completely mask your vulnerabilities from those watching. This rigorous, daily emotional regulation is perhaps the absolute highest form of practical self-mastery. It is rooted in the deep understanding that your emotional energy is a strictly finite and highly valuable personal resource. Giving this energy away freely to every single person who attempts to provoke or challenge you is a remarkably poor investment of your psychological capital. When you become unpredictable by choosing to remain consistently and unnervingly calm, you are effectively hoarding this power. You are actively choosing to spend your focused energy only on the things that genuinely matter, rather than squandering it entirely on the petty, predictable frictions of daily life. This careful, deliberate management of internal resources naturally and effortlessly elevates your status in any group dynamic. People inherently recognize, respect, and defer to those rare individuals who possess a massive surplus of self-control in the face of pressure. As you consistently practice this extreme restraint, you will begin to notice a distinct, undeniable change in the fundamental rhythm of your daily interactions. Human communication relies heavily on the predictable cycle of tension and immediate release. A predictable person constantly releases this tension immediately by answering questions far too quickly, by laughing nervously at unfunny remarks, or by agreeing rapidly just to keep the artificial peace. When you completely stop providing this immediate, expected release, the social tension naturally and powerfully builds. This tension is the raw, unrefined material of absolute focus and total attention. When you allow a question to hang heavily in the air for an extra 3 seconds before answering, you gather the complete, undivided attention of everyone in the room. You are no longer just a passive participant in the conversation. You have become the quiet, undeniable architect of its entire tempo. As we transition from the internal architecture of emotional regulation to the external execution of your daily life, we must examine how predictability directly impacts your professional trajectory and your long-term compounding growth. In high-stakes environments, whether navigating complex workplace dynamics or making critical career decisions, the highly predictable individual often functions at a severe disadvantage. When your colleagues, competitors, or counterparts can easily map out your exact response to pressure, they effectively hold the blueprint to your internal decision-making process. They can anticipate precisely when you will concede, when you will overextend yourself out of a desire to please, and when you will retreat into silence. This total transparency is a massive strategic liability. It fundamentally limits your ability to negotiate from a position of quiet strength. To become truly unignorable in these competitive arenas, you must drastically shift your operational aesthetic away from chaotic over-delivery and toward a highly disciplined, minimalist approach. Think of this profound shift in terms of visual design. A crowded, brightly colored image, overflowing with text and conflicting elements, exhausts the eye. It is loud, desperate, and ultimately forgettable because it lacks a clear, undeniable focal point. By contrast, a structure built on dark, minimalist principles, perhaps a stark black background punctuated only by sharp, intentional lines and a single, deliberate point of focus, commands immediate, sustained attention. It is clean, premium, and inherently impossible to ignore because it refuses to overwhelm the viewer. Your professional and personal presence must embody this exact same high-contrast, minimalist aesthetic. You must systematically remove the unnecessary, frantic actions that clutter your schedule and dilute your impact. When you stop volunteering for every minor task, stop rushing to fill every awkward silence in a meeting, and stop reacting instantly to every external demand, you strip away the background noise. What remains is a sharp, heavily weighted presence. This deliberate withdrawal of expected action creates a profound psychological shift in how your value is perceived by others. In the complex psychology of career advancement and wealth building, scarcity is a fundamental driver of perceived worth. If your time, your input, and your agreement are always readily available and highly predictable, their perceived market value naturally plummets. You become a highly functional commodity, and people tend to take commodities completely for granted. However, when you begin to carefully ration your availability and your emotional reactions, you instantly introduce the powerful element of scarcity into the dynamic. When your agreement is no longer a given, people must work significantly harder to earn it. When your input is not offered freely at every possible opportunity, the moments you do choose to speak carry immense gravity. This is not about playing manipulative games. It is about recognizing the inherent value of your own energy and choosing to deploy it with ethical clarity. The path to breaking your own predictability frequently requires mastering the quiet, unyielding power of the refusal. For the deeply predictable individual, saying yes is an automatic, thoughtless reflex. It is a deeply conditioned response designed to avoid immediate friction, please those in authority, and maintain a false sense of temporary harmony. But every predictable yes slowly drains your cognitive resources and dilutes your overarching focus. To become undeniably unignorable, you must learn to comfortably inhabit the discomfort of delivering a firm, unadorned no. You do not need to wrap your refusal in layers of frantic apologies or exhaustive, defensive justifications. A simple, calm declination is incredibly powerful, precisely because it radically disrupts the expected rhythm of compliance. It demonstrates a profound respect for your own boundaries and a quiet confidence that does not require the continuous, exhausting approval of the surrounding room. Consider the long-term compounding effect of these carefully measured decisions over time. A substantial career or a life of deep impact is rarely defined by one single, explosive moment of brilliance. It is almost entirely built upon the steady accumulation of thousands of micro-decisions. When these daily decisions are entirely predictable and deeply reactive, your trajectory tends to flatline. You remain permanently stuck in the same recurring patterns, facing the exact same frustrations year after relentless year. But when you inject deliberate unpredictability into your professional interactions, you fundamentally alter the geometry of that compounding curve. By choosing to remain silent when expected to argue, by delivering exceptional work without the expected demand for immediate praise, and by maintaining a cool, detached composure during moments of intense organizational panic, you actively separate yourself from the herd. You stop being a recognizable cog in the machine and start becoming a distinct, independent variable. This psychological transformation requires a deep understanding of the vital difference between being passive and being deliberately still. Passivity is a predictable reaction to fear. It is the act of shrinking away from conflict and hoping to remain entirely unnoticed by the threat. Deliberate stillness, however, is an active, highly intentional, and deeply powerful state of being. It is the conscious decision to anchor yourself firmly in the present moment, observing the chaos around you, without allowing it to dictate your physical or emotional movements. When a crisis hits the workplace, the predictable, expected response is to match the frantic energy of the environment. People rush, they raise their voices, and they scatter their focus. The individual who meets this exact same crisis with deliberate stillness becomes an immediate, unignorable anomaly. Their slow, methodical movements and calm, flat vocal tone create a powerful gravitational pull that grounds the entire room. Cultivating this level of internal stability is intrinsically linked to how you manage your external environment. The core principle of minimalism, where less stuff, more peace, serves as the foundational philosophy, applies just as rigorously to your psychological habits as it does to physical architecture. You must actively declutter your mind of the constant, exhausting need to anticipate what others are thinking about you. This obsession with external perception is the absolute root cause of almost all predictable behavior. When you are constantly trying to manage how you are seen, you naturally default to the safest, most expected patterns of interaction to avoid offending anyone. You must systematically abandon this exhausting pursuit. Recognize that you can never fully control the internal narratives of other people. The only territory you can effectively govern is your own mind and your deliberate actions. By letting go of perception management, you free up massive amounts of energy. This newly recovered cognitive bandwidth can then be redirected toward profound self-mastery and strategic execution. Instead of asking how you can make someone like you, you begin to ask how you can respond to a situation with the highest possible degree of integrity and discipline. This subtle shift in internal focus fundamentally alters your outward behavior. You stop performing for an audience and start acting in strict accordance with your own defined principles. People are deeply fascinated by individuals who operate entirely on their own internal axis. It is a remarkably rare quality in a world where most people are desperately looking outward for cues on how to behave. When you become entirely self-directed, your actions are no longer easily predictable because they are no longer dictated by the shifting expectations of the room. You become a highly complex, intriguing presence that others feel naturally compelled to respect. Let us deeply examine the role of verbal pacing in this process of breaking predictability. Predictable people frequently speak rapidly. They rush to get their words out, driven by an underlying, often unconscious fear that they will be interrupted or that their audience will quickly lose interest. This rapid, breathless pacing unconsciously signals low status and high anxiety. To command a room and become impossible to ignore, you must consciously and deliberately slow down your overall rate of speech. Introduce deliberate, heavy pauses between your sentences. Allow your words to land softly and completely before moving on to the next thought. This heavily measured cadence forces the listener to lean in physically and mentally. It requires them to slow their own internal processing to match your deliberate rhythm. By controlling the auditory pacing of the conversation, you effectively control the psychological environment of the interaction. The tactical application of this measured approach extends far beyond verbal communication. It must permeate your physical movements as well. Fast, jerky, and highly reactive physical movements are the absolute hallmarks of a scattered, predictable mind. They broadcast nervous energy and a severe lack of grounded presence. You must begin to consciously smooth out your physical transitions. Walk with a steady, deliberate, and unhurried pace. When you turn to address someone, do it smoothly, rather than snapping rapidly to attention. These subtle physical shifts may seem minor on the surface, but they collectively communicate a massive amount of psychological data to the people around you. They signal clearly that you are not easily startled, not easily rushed, and entirely comfortable moving through the world at your own dictated speed. This physical calm acts as a massive disruption to frantic energy. As you continually apply these principles, you will highly likely encounter resistance. People who are deeply accustomed to your previous, predictable patterns may feel unsettled by your newfound stillness. They may push harder, attempting to elicit the familiar, chaotic reactions they have come to rely upon. It is critically important that you do not view this resistance as a failure, but rather as clear, undeniable evidence that your internal shift is genuinely working. Their increased pressure is a natural, expected response to the sudden absence of their behavioral roadmap. Your sole task during these inevitable moments of friction is to remain completely anchored. Do not revert to your old, predictable habits just to relieve their temporary discomfort. Hold the line with calm, ethical clarity. Maintain your deliberate silence. Maintain your measured pacing. Over time, their frantic energy will inevitably subside, and they will adapt to your new reality. Ultimately, the process of becoming unignorable is not about adopting a rigid, unfeeling persona or pretending to be someone you are not. It is about clearing away the dense, predictable underbrush of conditioned reflexes so that your genuine strength can finally be seen and felt. It is about understanding that true power does not roar. It observes, it processes, and it acts only when the action serves a distinct, necessary, and ethical purpose. By embracing deep psychological minimalism, by mastering your verbal and physical pacing, and by entirely detaching from the exhausting need for external validation, you build a presence that is deeply rooted and undeniably potent. You transition from being a easily readable, entirely predictable character in someone else's narrative to being the undeniable, unshakable architect of your own reality. The journey requires immense daily discipline, but the reward is absolute personal sovereignty. As we navigate past initial external resistance from those preferring your old patterns, we turn our focus entirely inward to the fundamental reconstruction of your core identity. The strategic application of silence, physical pacing, and the measured pause are hollow if unanchored to a profound internal shift. You cannot wear the outward mask of an unignorable individual while internally remaining captive to historical anxieties. Your mind's architecture must be completely renovated to achieve lasting stability. Adopt a fiercely minimalist aesthetic for your internal emotional landscape. Imagine your mind not as a crowded room filled with chaotic noise, but as a sharp, high-contrast canvas. Picture a vast, deep black background where only the most essential, sharply defined lines of thought are permitted to actively exist, shining with deliberate clarity, like fine gold typography against the dark. This visual metaphor of high-contrast minimalism is exactly how you must efficiently curate your internal state, systematically eliminate the dull gray static of continuous worry, the reflexive need to appease, and the cluttered desire for immediate validation. Then in their place, install a stark, highly intentional focus that cuts through daily noise with undeniable precision. This is about becoming infinitely more concentrated. When your internal environment operates with this high-contrast clarity, your external reactions naturally cease to be predictable, because they are no longer governed by the cluttered emotions of the immediate moment. They are governed by your deliberate baseline. A critical component of maintaining this pristine internal architecture is learning how to ethically dismantle the ego's exhausting demand to be recognized as right. In the vast majority of common conflicts, predictability is directly driven by the ego's frantic need to immediately defend its fragile position. When someone offers a critique, the predictable ego instantly flares up, demanding you raise your voice, list accomplishments, and aggressively prove them wrong. This specific reaction is so entirely expected that it renders you instantly invisible in a sea of similarly reactive individuals. To become impossible to ignore, actively deny your ego this cheap, predictable fuel. When challenged, step back and observe the critique with cold, detached curiosity, treating the incoming words simply as pure raw data, rather than a personal attack on your fundamental worth. This practice of detached observation requires you to separate your core identity from the temporary fluctuations of daily workplace or relational conflict. When you attach your entire sense of self to being universally liked or completely understood by every single person you interact with, you become an incredibly easy target for subtle manipulation. People learn they can steer your behavior simply by offering or withholding their temporary approval. This is the definition of being a predictable known quantity. However, when you securely anchor your identity to your own internal standards of discipline, ethical execution, and emotional restraint, you completely remove the leverage others hold over you. You become structurally sound. If a colleague attempts to bait you into a predictable argument, you do not feel the agonizing internal pressure to engage, because your self-worth is no longer actively tied to winning their temporary game. You simply acknowledge their statement with a calm, flat tone, and gently redirect the conversation back to strictly necessary facts. This quiet refusal to actively engage creates a massive, unignorable advantage. Many individuals fear that adopting extreme emotional containment will cause them to be perceived as cold, arrogant, or fundamentally unapproachable. It is crucial to firmly reframe this completely common massive misconception. Arrogance is a highly predictable, deeply insecure state of being characterized by a loud, constant need to belittle others. The individual who is truly impossible to ignore operates from a place of warm detachment. Warm detachment means you remain fiercely respectful, impeccably polite, and entirely present in the interaction, but absolutely refuse to absorb the chaotic emotional turbulence of the people around you. You are kind, but not easily accessible. You are helpful, but not readily available to be used as a repository for other people's unprocessed stress. This subtle but profound distinction fundamentally alters the power dynamic in any relationship. People naturally gravitate toward warmth, but they deeply respect and cautiously revere detachment. By carefully combining these two elements, you create a powerful, magnetic presence that invites engagement, while simultaneously enforcing an invisible perimeter of deep respect. This vital perimeter is not actively built through aggressive confrontation. It is built through the quiet, relentless consistency of your unpredictability. The paradox of becoming unignorable is that you must become completely predictable in your core values, but entirely unpredictable in your tactical reactions. Your professional colleagues should always know that you operate with absolute integrity, deliver exceptionally high-quality work, and treat people with fundamental fairness. These foundational principles must be rock solid. However, they should never be able to predict exactly how you will navigate a sudden crisis, handle an aggressive negotiation, or respond to an unexpected personal slight. It is this specific combination, having a deeply reliable moral core surrounded by a fiercely guarded, highly unpredictable tactical exterior, that inherently makes an individual utterly fascinating. When people know they can trust your character, but cannot entirely anticipate your next move, they are forced to remain continuously alert and deeply engaged in your presence. They simply cannot put you on expected autopilot. Consider the profound impact of this dynamic in a leadership scenario. A predictable leader manages their team through easily anticipated cycles of stress and relief. They micromanage when pressure increases, raise their voice when deadlines approach, and offer standard, hollow praise when daily tasks are finally completed. The team quickly learns to navigate these predictable emotional spikes, doing just enough to avoid their anger and secure their praise, but rarely operating at their maximum potential. Conversely, the unignorable leader manages the environment entirely through the power of strategic clarity and calm, measured pacing. When a massive crisis hits, they do not accelerate. They deliberately slow down. They ask quiet, penetrating questions. They strip away panic and demand high-contrast, minimalist solutions. This sudden drop in emotional temperature forces the entire team to instantly recalibrate. They stop panicking because the focal point of the room is entirely safely anchored in stillness. You are not forcing people to calm down through intimidation. You naturally regulate their nervous systems through the immense gravity of absolute self-control. To reach this level of mastery, you must become incredibly comfortable inhabiting the unknown. When predictable people are universally terrified of ambiguity, they rapidly rush to label situations, define relationships prematurely, and force immediate resolutions, because the tension of uncertainty is too painful for their unconditioned minds to bear. To become truly impossible to ignore, actively lean into this exact tension. Learn to sit quietly in the unresolved spaces of your daily life. When a critical negotiation stalls, do not frantically offer concessions just to break the uncomfortable silence. Allow the stall to exist. Allow the other party to feel the heavy weight of the silence. When navigating a complex personal dynamic, do not rush to establish a rigid definition of the relationship just to soothe your own internal anxiety. Allow the dynamic to unfold naturally, maintaining your calm, observant presence. The individual who can patiently outlast others in a state of ambiguity almost always dictates the final terms of the resolution. This elevated tolerance for tension is built upon a foundation of profound self-sufficiency. If you desperately need the external environment to validate your worth, you will always be a slave to predictable, reactionary behaviors. You will compromise your own established boundaries for a momentary scrap of approval. Actively cultivate a private internal world that is entirely self-sustaining. Find quiet satisfaction in the meticulous execution of daily routines. Take pride in the silent maintenance of emotional discipline, and draw immense strength from refusing to participate in unnecessary drama. When you are genuinely self-sufficient, interactions naturally transform from desperate transactions into deliberate choices. Speak not because you need to be heard, but because you have something of immense value to inject into the space. Act, not because you need to be seen, but because the deliberate action logically moves you toward a clearly defined objective. As you proceed carefully through your daily environment carrying this new emotional architecture, you will experience a truly profound shift. You will notice that people interrupt you less frequently. Your carefully chosen words are weighed much more heavily. Your quiet presence commands more physical space. The frantic, chaotic energy of others tends to dissipate the moment they enter your immediate orbit. It is not manipulation. It is the natural, mathematical result of removing expected friction from the equation of human interaction. By systematically refusing to be predictable, by guarding your emotional energy with uncompromising discipline, and by filtering your reactions through a stark, minimalist psychological lens, you elevate yourself above the noise. You become a fixed point of truth in a world governed by fluctuating, reactive emotions. You become the quiet, undeniably powerful architect of your own unignorable reality. You step out of the shadows by firmly refusing to dance in them. As we transition from internal fortification to the external execution of your daily actions, we must critically re-examine how you deliver value. In professional spheres, the most common trap of predictability is the desperate need to announce your efforts. The predictable individual is terrified that their work will go unnoticed. Therefore, they broadcast every minor struggle, narrate every obstacle overcome, and loudly signal their exhaustion as a twisted badge of honor. They believe showing friction secures appreciation. However, human psychology operates on a vastly different wavelength. When you constantly narrate your process, you exhaust the attention of your audience long before the final result is delivered. By the time you present your work, the psychological impact is deeply diluted. The audience is already entirely familiar with the struggle, and the outcome feels like a tedious, expected conclusion rather than a moment of genuine, highly respected excellence. This diminishes true power. To become entirely impossible to ignore, you must radically shift this dynamic by mastering the art of silent execution. You must completely decouple your need for validation from the daily process of your work. The unignorable individual operates in the quiet shadows of deep, uninterrupted focus. They do not complain about the workload. They do not send frantic updates to prove they are actively engaged. They simply absorb the friction internally, process the complex variables, and present a finished, highly polished result seemingly out of nowhere. This sudden, unannounced delivery of immense value creates a profound psychological shockwave. It is the stark contrast between the absolute silence of the process and the massive weight of the final product that commands deep respect. When you deliver excellence without the expected preamble, you construct an aura of effortless competence. People begin to assume your overall capacity is truly, entirely without visible limits. This specific methodology fundamentally leverages the psychological principle of the unexpected positive. The human brain is specifically wired to heavily reward and remember pleasant surprises far more vividly than clearly expected outcomes. If a predictable employee promises to deliver a project on Friday and delivers it, the brain registers this as a neutral, easily forgettable event. The expectation was merely met. But if you quietly absorb the requirements, make no grand promises, and smoothly deliver an impeccable solution on Wednesday without friction, you create a massive information gap. They are forced to actively pause and recalibrate their understanding of your capabilities. They cannot predict how you achieved such a high level of quality with so little visible stress. This inability to map your internal process makes you infinitely more valuable and intensely fascinating to closely observe. Unpredictable delivery inherently commands an elevated level of professional reverence and deep psychological respect. Implementing this silent execution requires you to systematically break the ingrained habit of the constant approval loop. Many individuals are entirely paralyzed unless they receive continuous, incremental validation from their peers or managers. They take one small step and then immediately look up to check if they are being watched and praised. This constant checking completely destroys personal authority. It loudly signals that you do not trust your own internal compass and that your actions depend on external permission. You must actively sever this dependency. When given a directive, take the information and retreat into your own highly structured, minimalist workspace. Trust your own capacity to navigate the complexities without needing someone to hold your hand through the predictable milestones. By the time you finally emerge, your completed action will speak with an undeniable volume. Execution in isolation demonstrates profound self-reliance and builds an unshakable foundation of quiet power. The contrast created by this quiet execution extends directly into how you manage your overall digital availability. The predictable person is always on, constantly accessible, and instantly responsive. If an email arrives, they reply within seconds, terrified that a slight delay means a lack of dedication. This immediate accessibility severely degrades their perceived value. If anyone can reach you at any given moment and demand an immediate response, you effectively declare that your time has no inherent boundaries and very little structural worth. To become truly unignorable, you must intentionally cultivate periods of total unreachability. You must train the people in your environment to clearly understand that you operate on your own deliberate timeline, not on their frantic reactive schedules. When engaged in deep work, be entirely absent from digital noise. Let the minor emergencies resolve themselves without your immediate, highly predictable external intervention and constant emotional participation. Maintain distance. When you finally choose to re-engage and respond, the quality of your attention must be absolute. This is the crucial counterbalance to strategic withdrawal. When you are unavailable, you are a complete void. But when you are present, you must be the most intensely focused, grounded, and observant person in the room. This extreme contrast between total absence and total presence is incredibly magnetic. It is the exact opposite of the predictable individual who is physically present all day long, but constantly distracted, scattered in thought, and offering only a diluted fraction of their actual attention. By offering your presence in concentrated, heavily weighted doses, you ensure that every single interaction carries significant impact. People will naturally begin to clear their own mental clutter when they interact with you, because they inherently sense that your time and absolute focus are exceptionally rare commodities, requiring their absolute best professional engagement, consistently. This principle of stark contrast applies just as strongly to how you handle eventual success and resulting praise. When a deeply predictable person achieves a significant victory, they frequently react in one of two anticipated ways. They either inflate with visible arrogance, loudly demanding acknowledgement, or they shrink into a false humility, deflecting the compliment and desperately attributing their hard work to mere luck. Both reactions are easily mapped and rapidly dismissed by observers. The individual who is impossible to ignore handles praise with the exact same calm, flat emotional baseline used to handle criticism. When someone offers a high compliment regarding your exceptional work, the most powerful response is a simple, steady look of acknowledgement and a calm expression of gratitude. You do not elaborate. You do not self-deprecate. You do not artificially inflate your own ego. You just absorb the positive energy with total silent inner grace. By accepting praise with this quiet, neutral dignity, you project a deeply intimidating level of internal certainty. You silently communicate that the exceptional result you delivered was not a rare, lucky anomaly, but simply the standard, expected output of your daily baseline. It suggests that you are not surprised by your own excellence, which inherently forces the observer to view your competence as a permanent fact, rather than a fleeting event. This subtle psychological reframing drastically increases your overall influence. People naturally defer to the individual who treats massive success as a normal, expected reality. It entirely removes the chaotic, desperate energy of someone fighting to prove their basic worth, replacing it with the heavy, unshakable gravity of someone who simply knows their exact value and feels absolutely no compulsion to eagerly explain it to anyone else present in the immediate social or professional surrounding room at any given time. As you consistently apply this framework of silent execution and deliberate presence, you will notice a profound shift in the opportunities that arrive, because you are no longer reacting to the petty, predictable dramas of the daily environment. You naturally free up the cognitive space required to observe the larger dynamics at play. You begin to see the subtle currents of office politics, the unstated motivations of clients, and the deeper emotional needs of partners. This elevated observation is completely impossible when you are caught in the frantic, predictable cycle of constant reaction. From this calm vantage point, you can make highly strategic, calculated moves that seem almost prescient to those around you. You anticipate problems before they fully materialize, and you casually offer solutions that seamlessly address the fundamental root cause, rather than merely fighting the surface-level symptoms that distract everyone else operating at lower frequencies. True foresight. This is how you transition from being a participant in the environment to becoming the master architect of the environment. You stop waiting for instructions and start quietly dictating the terms of engagement through your unshakable, deliberate actions. Your predictability vanishes entirely because your actions are no longer tethered to the emotional fluctuations of the room. They are anchored strictly to your own internal logic and your deeply held, ethical principles. People cannot easily map a system operating on pure, silent competence. By mastering the art of the unannounced outcome, you firmly cement your position as a deeply formidable, highly respected presence in any setting. You leave them completely without a predictable behavioral map. You replace the exhausting anxiety of needing to be seen with the quiet, undeniable reality of being entirely indispensable and utterly unforgettable. This is true structural strength. It is calm, deliberate, and exceedingly powerful in application. As we reach the final stage of this psychological reconstruction, the focus shifts from tactical application to the permanent integration of these principles into your core identity. Up to this point, you have been actively practicing the mechanics of unpredictability. You have learned the deliberate pause, the strategic withdrawal of immediate emotional reaction, and the heavy impact of silent, unannounced execution. But a tactic, by its very nature, requires conscious, active effort. If you remain in a tactical mindset, you will eventually experience profound cognitive fatigue. The human mind cannot sustain a continuous, exhausting performance indefinitely. The ultimate goal is not to perform a new persona, but to structurally evolve your baseline reality. You must transition from actively trying to be unignorable to simply existing as an immovable, deeply grounded presence. This occurs when the principles of high-contrast minimalism and emotional containment sink beneath the level of conscious effort and become the natural, default operating system of your nervous system, when you no longer have to remind yourself to remain calm under pressure, because your mind inherently recognizes that reacting with chaotic energy serves absolutely no logical purpose. This permanent shift requires a deep, fundamental acceptance of your own inherent value, completely independent of external validation. You must internalize the reality that your worth is not a fluctuating currency traded on the open market of public opinion. It is a fixed, internal asset. When you truly integrate this understanding, your behavior naturally loses all traces of predictable desperation. You stop acting in ways designed to frantically preserve your status, because your status is no longer in question in your own mind. And this quiet internal certainty is perhaps the most magnetic quality a human being can possess. It radiates a profound sense of psychological safety that naturally draws others into your orbit, even as you maintain your strictly defined emotional boundaries. Maintaining this newly constructed baseline will likely test your resolve, especially as you interact with individuals who heavily rely on chaotic, predictable patterns. People who are deeply uncomfortable with silence, ambiguity, and calm observation will often increase their frantic energy in a desperate attempt to force you back into a recognizable, reactive state. They might issue subtle provocations, manufacture minor, unnecessary crises, or deliberately misinterpret your calm detachment as personal arrogance. It is critically important that you anticipate this friction. This is not a sign that your approach is failing. It is clear evidence that the old, predictable dynamic has been successfully shattered, and the surrounding environment is struggling to adapt to your new architectural structure. When faced with this escalating pressure, your responsibility is to remain the unmoving center of the interaction. You do not need to aggressively defend your calmness, nor do you need to explain your deliberate pacing. Any attempt to justify your quiet presence instantly pulls you back into the predictable cycle of desperate explaining and constant validation seeking. Instead, simply allow their chaotic energy to crash against the solid, unyielding wall of your silence. Observe their frantic attempts to categorize you with the same detached, clinical curiosity you would use to watch a storm safely from behind a thick pane of glass. By refusing to match their emotional frequency, you force them to eventually lower their own volume. You dictate the terms of engagement, not through loud demands, but through the sheer, gravitational density of your profound internal control. This method of navigating conflict tends to permanently alter how people approach you in the future. They quickly learn that their old tactical maps are entirely useless, and they naturally begin to treat your boundaries with a significantly higher degree of careful, deliberate respect. But this brings us to the profound ethical responsibility that accompanies this level of psychological clarity. Becoming impossible to ignore is not an invitation to manipulate, dominate, or exploit the vulnerabilities of those around you. When you remove predictability from your behavior, you inadvertently expose the deeply conditioned, reflexive reactions of others. You begin to see their insecurities, their desperate need for approval, and their hidden fears with stark, uncomfortable clarity. With this heightened perception comes a strict ethical mandate. You must use this understanding to communicate more effectively and to foster mutual benefit, refusing to inflict psychological damage. True strategic power is inherently ethical. It recognizes that tearing others down to artificially inflate your own perceived value is a weak, deeply predictable tactic born of profound insecurity. The individual who operates from a place of true strength uses their unshakable presence to elevate the standard of the entire environment. When you refuse to engage in petty gossip, when you absorb an insult without returning it, and when you maintain rigorous emotional control during a collective panic, you provide a rare model of psychological stability. You become a structural anchor for the people around you. This is the highest form of influence. You are not forcing people to follow you through intimidation. You are naturally inspiring them to raise their own internal standards by demonstrating what complete internal mastery actually looks like in daily application. This ethical framework ensures that your presence is not only unignorable, but deeply respected and fundamentally trusted. It builds lasting, compounding relational equity that superficial, manipulative tactics simply cannot replicate. You are cultivating a reputation for fairness, emotional regulation, and absolute integrity, wrapped in a highly unpredictable, deeply fascinating tactical exterior. As you navigate the complexities of sustained career growth and personal relationships, you will frequently encounter the temptation to slip back into the comfortable, warm bath of predictability. There will be days when you are deeply exhausted, when the cognitive load is heavy, and when the simplest path seems to be giving in to an old, reflexive habit. You might feel the sudden urge to complain loudly, to seek rapid reassurance, or to fire off a frantic emotional response to a stressful situation. In these critical moments, the discipline of the pause becomes your absolute lifeline. You must consciously arrest the momentum of the predictable reflex before it breaches the surface of your external behavior. Remind yourself that the temporary relief of a predictable outburst is not worth the massive, lasting cost to your structural authority. Every time you successfully hold the line against your own conditioned impulses, you reinforce the architecture of your new baseline. You strengthen the neural pathways associated with discipline, restraint, and deliberate action. Over time, these daily victories compound into an unbreakable psychological fortress. You will slowly realize that the external environment has entirely lost its ability to dictate your internal emotional weather. A crisis at work, a challenging negotiation, or a complex personal disagreement will no longer trigger the old, exhausting cascade of panic and frantic reaction. Instead, they will simply be processed as external data points, objective variables to be managed efficiently by your calm, unshakable mind. This transition is subtle, but the impact it has on your overall life trajectory is absolutely massive. You effectively reclaim the vast amounts of time and mental energy previously wasted on managing unnecessary emotional friction, allowing you to redirect those resources toward profound, strategic execution. The journey to becoming impossible to ignore ultimately leads to a state of profound personal freedom. Predictability is a psychological cage built entirely from the expectations of others and the unexamined fears of your own past conditioning. When you systematically dismantle this cage, you step into a vast, open territory of deliberate choice. You are no longer reacting to the world, you are consciously interacting with it on your own carefully defined terms. Your words begin to carry undeniable gravity because they are rare, measured, and heavily considered. Your presence commands deep respect because it is completely independent and entirely untethered from the desperate need for external validation. You transition from being a recognizable, easily categorized character in the background of life to becoming the undeniable, unshakable author of your own reality. People will naturally look to you, not because you are loudly demanding their attention, but because your quiet, intense clarity provides a stark, fascinating contrast to the chaotic noise of the world. They will likely seek your counsel, respect your boundaries, and carefully study your movements, entirely captivated by the mystery of a mind completely at peace with itself. This is the profound reward of deep psychological discipline. It is a quiet, heavy power that cannot be easily imitated or quickly undone. As we prepare to conclude this exploration, take a moment to fully internalize the architecture we have meticulously built. Recognize the immense strength that lies in strategic silence, deliberate pacing, and the uncompromising refusal to surrender your emotional sovereignty to the unpredictable demands of the external environment. You possess the complete capacity to fundamentally reshape how the world perceives you, simply by changing the deeply conditioned ways you permit yourself to respond to it. This structural shift changes everything forever. The disciplined mind remains a truly powerful anomaly, standing entirely firm and fundamentally unshakable amidst the relentless, ever-predictable chaos of the world. We have reached the culmination of this profound psychological restructuring. The journey away from the exhausting, deeply conditioned patterns of predictability is not a minor adjustment in social tactics. It is a fundamental reclamation of your personal sovereignty. We began by acknowledging a difficult, often uncomfortable truth. The vast majority of our daily actions, our emotional outbursts, and our defensive retractions are not conscious choices. They are well-worn grooves, behavioral scripts written by past experiences and maintained by a deep, unconscious desire for temporary safety. We falsely believed that by making ourselves entirely known, by over-explaining our motives and instantly broadcasting our distress, we were securing connection and understanding. Instead, we were actively rendering ourselves invisible. We became a solved equation, a background element in the chaotic architecture of other people's lives. But you now possess the complete blueprint to systematically dismantle that limiting structure. You have learned that true power does not reside in being the loudest voice in the room, nor does it exist in the frantic, desperate scramble for continuous external validation. True, undeniable power is found in the quiet, expansive space between a provocation and your chosen response. It is within this profound stillness that you reclaim your agency. You have moved beyond the superficial layers of social conditioning and penetrated the core mechanics of human interaction. This is not a temporary shift. It is a permanent elevation of your baseline consciousness. You now understand that predictability is merely a symptom of a mind that has not yet learned to govern itself. As you step back into your daily environment, you carry with you a completely renovated internal landscape. The cluttered, reactive noise of your past has been entirely replaced by a stark, high-contrast mental minimalism. You no longer permit every passing comment, every minor workplace friction, or every subtle personal slight to clutter your psychological workspace. You evaluate incoming pressure with cold, detached clarity. When the world expects you to rush forward and eagerly fill the uncomfortable silence, you will instead anchor yourself, allowing the tension to stretch and expand. You have discovered that silence is not an absence of communication. It is a heavy, dense, and profoundly articulate boundary. By choosing to withhold your predictable reactions, you force those around you to wake up from their own automated slumbers. They can no longer interact with an imaginary, easily manipulated version of you. They are forced to engage with the absolute reality of your present, unshakable self. This sudden disruption of their expectations is what inherently makes you entirely impossible to ignore. Think of this internal state as a masterfully designed architectural space. It is uncrowded, intentional, and deeply resonant. The walls are painted in the stark, heavy tones of absolute self-discipline, and the only light permitted to enter is the sharp, brilliant beam of your own focused intent. When you invite others into this space through your interactions, they immediately sense the elevated standard. They realize, often unconsciously, that their standard, chaotic methods of engagement will simply not function here. This transformation requires you to continuously manage your emotional energy with the exact same ruthless discipline an elite investor applies to compounding capital. Every time you refuse to engage in petty drama, every time you absorb an insult without returning fire, and every time you deliver exceptional, high-quality work without demanding immediate frantic praise, you are actively depositing psychological capital into your own internal reserves. Over weeks, months, and years, these quiet, deliberate micro-decisions compound massively. They forge a reputation of absolute structural integrity. People inherently sense when someone possesses a massive surplus of self-control. It radiates from you in the deliberate slowness of your physical movements, the calm, flat cadence of your speech, and the unwavering intensity of your focus. You become a psychological monolith. Consider the concept of the compounding effect, not just in wealth, but in personal character. A predictable person spends their daily psychological capital on frivolous, reactive purchases. A quick burst of anger here, an unnecessary apology there. They are constantly internally broke. The unignorable individual hoards this capital. They invest it solely in long-term, high-yield behaviors, profound focus, unshakable calmness, and strategic execution. By doing so, they amass a fortune of personal authority that becomes entirely undeniable to anyone who crosses their path. You become the quiet, heavy gravity that silently dictates the orbit of the entire room. It is crucial to remember, however, that this elevated position carries a strict, uncompromising ethical mandate. The ability to command deep respect and control the psychological tempo of an interaction must never be weaponized. We do not abandon predictability to foster paranoia, to manipulate the vulnerable, or to dominate others for the mere sake of feeding a fragile ego. The desire to actively tear others down is the ultimate hallmark of a weak, deeply predictable mind. Your unshakable presence must serve as a stabilizing anchor for the environment you inhabit. When chaotic energy spikes around you, when colleagues panic over shifting deadlines, or when a personal dynamic devolves into irrational accusations, your rigorous emotional containment becomes a protective shield for everyone involved. You do not catch their panic. You absorb it, neutralize it, and reflect back absolute clarity. You elevate the standard of human interaction simply by refusing to participate in its most degrading, predictable patterns. This is the hallmark of true, ethical leadership. It is influence built on a foundation of unyielding character and profound personal responsibility. You are proving that it is entirely possible to be overwhelmingly powerful without being the slightest bit toxic. In a society that frequently confuses aggressive dominance with genuine strength, your calm, regulated presence serves as a masterclass in true psychological superiority. You show them that the ultimate demonstration of power is not raising your voice to demand compliance, but lowering your volume so drastically that they must lean in, holding their breath just to catch your words. Moving forward, you will inevitably face the gravitational pull of your old habits. The human brain is a deeply stubborn mechanism, and the desire to revert to the path of least cognitive resistance will occasionally feel overwhelming. There will be high-pressure moments where your ego will scream at you to defend yourself, to raise your volume, and to prove your worth to someone who is fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you. When that intense internal pressure rises, you must instantly deploy the most critical weapon in your new arsenal, the deliberate, extended pause. Stop. Breathe, observe the mechanical nature of your own rising anger, and then consciously, ruthlessly deny it the external expression it craves. Do not give away your power for the fleeting, hollow satisfaction of a predictable argument, but hold the line. Reconnect with the dark, minimalist architecture of your internal peace. Recognize that your inherent value is an immovable fact. It does not require an active defense strategy. Every single time you successfully override a predictable impulse, you fundamentally rewrite your own neurological code. You sever the chains of past conditioning and forge a new, unbreakable link in the chain of your personal mastery. This is the daily, unseen labor of the elite mind. It is not always glamorous, and it rarely receives immediate applause, but it is the exact work that separates the forgettable masses from the deeply consequential few. When you feel the tension mounting, recognize it as a test of your new architecture. Smile internally at the predictability of the challenge, and meet it with an absolute, impenetrable wall of calm observation. Ultimately, the pursuit of becoming impossible to ignore is not genuinely about the external attention you receive. The deep respect of your peers, the accelerated trajectory of your career, and the elevated quality of your personal relationships are merely the natural, mathematical byproducts of this profound internal shift. The true, lasting victory is the absolute freedom you secure for yourself. When you are no longer a slave to the expectations, the judgments, and the chaotic emotional weather of other people, you gain exclusive ownership over your own existence. You walk into any room, enter any negotiation, and engage in any relationship with the quiet, unassailable certainty of an individual who is completely internally complete. You are no longer desperately seeking a place in the world. You are calmly and deliberately creating it. You have stripped away the frantic, desperate noise, leaving behind only the sharp, undeniable truth of your own focused intent. You are no longer waiting for the world to assign you a value. You have calculated your own worth, independently audited your own character, and determined that you require zero outside confirmation to validate your existence. This level of self-sufficiency is the ultimate armor. When compliments bounce off you without inflating your ego, and insults shatter against you without leaving a dent, you have successfully escaped the predictable matrix of human frailty. Let this understanding settle deeply into your consciousness. You are the sole architect of your immediate reality. Your time, your attention, and your emotional reactions are the most precious, finite resources you will ever possess. Guard them with uncompromising ferocity. Deploy them only when it serves a distinct, deliberate, and entirely ethical purpose. The world will always be filled with predictable noise. It will always be crowded with individuals frantically waving their hands, desperately hoping to be seen. You will no longer be among them. You will stand quietly at the edge of the chaos, a pillar of calm, unshakable strength. By mastering the profound art of doing less, reacting less, and needing less, you will effortlessly command more space, more respect, and more influence than you ever thought possible. Step entirely out of the predictable loop. Embrace the profound gravity of your own silence. Become the quiet, unmoving center. From this moment forward, every interaction is a canvas for your discipline, every conflict is an opportunity for containment, and every silence is a demonstration of your power. Become entirely, undeniably, and permanently impossible to ignore.